So again, just quickly, I think what we tend to find is that we all carry diverse identities that are all interconnected or intersectional, and that within each of us, we often have identities that maybe fall into the dominant group and some that may fall into the non-dominant group or the less powerful group. And as I put at the bottom, a lot of this is context specific. So just thinking about the interplay of that and what that means to hold these different identities that have varying degrees of privilege and power, and how that affects our relationships with each other. Next slide, please. When we take that to a global level and we think about the role of development and our engagement with people around the world, Teju Cole is a writer and thought leader who I follow as someone who really challenges this notion of the white savior and the white savior industrial complex. And he really provokes a lot of conversation in the development field about what is the role in particular of the US or Western countries in developing countries. And before we engage, before we go to do a study abroad program or to do a service learning project or to study abroad in another country or to develop a development project, are we really engaging with people in that setting? Are we working hand in hand with them to ask them, do you want help? Are we the ones to help? What could we do together? And those kinds of questions are not really asked often enough. And instead, people may go with good intentions, but the impact of their engagement may be harmful, in fact. So that first principle of first do no harm. Okay, next slide. And I want to talk a little about leadership and global competence in leadership. Because when we think of a leader, just right now, think of a leader. Think of the most impressive leader you could possibly think of. So what's one leader? Yes?
T'Challa.
Sorry?
T'Challa.
Say that again.
T'Challa.
I didn't understand.
T'Challa.
Okay. I should have said in the beginning, I'm hearing impaired, and so it makes it a little bit challenging to hear.
T'Challa.
Okay, so that's the leader you thought of. Who else? What's another leader? Yes? Nelson Mandela. Okay. And so when we think about the qualities of a leader, do we often think of qualities like humility, like advancing equity, promoting diversity? Here I just wanted to show an example of the World Health Organization and the Director General before and now, and the makeup of the leadership. This is the World Health Organization leadership team, is the team that's responsible for developing policies on health for the world. And you see on the left, who's in the picture? It's primarily white men. And then you look on the right, and this is the current makeup due to the leadership of the Secretary General of the World Health Organization, and he very deliberately chose more than 50% women and leaders who are from the regions of the world that they are representing. Imagine that. From the regions that they're representing. And so this is, again, this idea about how do we bring global competence into our leadership. Okay, next slide. So when we think about globalization, next slide, and US global engagement, just thinking about, again, what that means. Next slide. When you look at this image here, what do you see? And I'll show you in a minute now what I see. Next slide, please. So who are these two people? We have President Obama and we have a Bobby who's outside 10 Downing Street. The press caught this picture, and it was the first time that a head of state had actually shaken hands with a Bobby who's been outside 10 Downing Street. There's always been a Bobby outside 10 Downing Street. And so here we see a head of state who's shaking hands with, acknowledging, and having an interaction with someone on a very human level. And so the word foreigner, he's an American, he's probably British, and that idea of foreigner, who's a foreigner, is really losing its meaning. Okay, next slide, please. When we think about the reactions towards globalization, there can be a lot of reactions. It could be fear-based. Some people feel afraid of how increasingly diverse we're becoming, or of our US engagement in other countries. And that can result in, and they may be afraid of having war or conflict with other countries, or environmental disaster, or again, this kind of increasing social diversity and what that means for that individual. Slide, please. Or we could choose to have another reaction to globalization, which is that we could accept the challenges and the opportunities that diversity presents, and we could counterbalance any fear we have with love. And when I talk about love, I'm not talking about this kind of trite Hallmark notion or Hollywood notion of love. I'm talking about really active engagement with each other in a way that shows how much we love each other as humans. And I'm showing about, having enough love to take a knee when the rest of our team is still standing because of protesting police violence against our people. And I'm talking about standing up to sexual harassment and rape in industries and uniting with women across different industries to do so, the Me Too movement. And I'm talking about confronting racist protesters because we care enough to look someone in the eye and say, from human to human, what you're doing is wrong and needs to stop. So love, unconditional love thy neighbor kind of love, next slide please, is something that we need to cultivate more of. Next slide please. And I wanted to just tell you a story. When I was in South Africa, I was visiting the home of Nelson Mandela, where there's now a museum. And there was a black South African woman who was working in the store, and I was browsing the store looking for something to find for my son, who's biracial. And previously that day, we had spent the entire day in what my South African colleagues were calling Heritage Day. So we were going and visiting a lot of the sites where a lot of major events of apartheid took place. And all day, I felt like my heart was in my throat because we were all reliving the atrocities of apartheid and of the injustices and the violence that white people perpetuated against black and brown people in South Africa. And so I was still feeling the effects of that incredible violence of white apartheid. And I'm in the store and just kind of browsing, and I come across a t-shirt that has this logo of South Africa, the Rainbow Nation. And it has this image of, in this case, of a brown boy under this rainbow of South Africa as a rainbow nation. And so I asked the woman in the store, what does this mean, a rainbow nation? And she said, well, in South Africa, we consider ourselves to be a rainbow nation because we have people of all races and ethnicities living together as one country. And I said, this is perfect, this is great. I'll buy this for my son because my son is definitely a child of the rainbow nation, being biracial. And she looked at me with this very patient smile, and she took my arm and she said, so are you, my dear. And I realized in that moment that as a white person, I had been oblivious to my own race, and that I was also a member of this rainbow nation. It wasn't only the people of color who were part of that, it's also the white people. And to have a black South African woman who had lived through the injustices of apartheid embrace me as a white American as part of her rainbow nation was so beautiful and so gracious that I immediately started sobbing uncontrollably and had this kind of interaction with this woman. And I often think about that experience when I think about how we all think about each other in relation to our rainbow nation. And so I founded my firm, Global Citizen, on this belief that with greater awareness, understanding, sensitivity, and skills, that we can cultivate that kind of embody that notion of a rainbow nation, and that we can, and I don't mean that in any kind of trite way, but in a real way. We can see each other, we can see each other's similarities and differences, we can respect each other, and we can create a world, a globally competent world, in which everyone is included, and everyone has a vital role to play. And this is the kind of work that I'm wanting to advance through my work and in partnership with you and everyone else who I'm working with. And so I invite you, next slide please, to stay connected through Facebook, Global Citizen LLC, through LinkedIn, through Twitter, next slide please. And also to think about for yourselves, how will you commit to and how will you model global citizenry in your work here at Cary Academy and also in the world? So I want you to be thinking about that. How will you embody? How will you model global citizenry, global competence? And hopefully we have time for, so what we're going to do is we're going to play a song on your way out. And as you're kind of watching the video and listening to it, I want you to be thinking about how globalization and global citizenry is represented, and again, about your commitment to global citizenry. So thank you all so much. It's been such a pleasure.